while I lay in a hospital bed with needles in my arm and a monitor counting down the last beats of my heart. I once asked him about 15 years ago, the one he swore meant nothing at first. I thought maybe the nurse had delivered the bouquet to the wrong room, but when I saw the note, I knew. You've always been my one and only. Signed, James. My husband. Not to me. Not on the day I was told I might not live to see tomorrow, to someone named Elena. And the most painful part, he didn't even try to hide it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call him instead. I picked up the one thing I still had control over, a pen. Because if I couldn't survive this, then I was damn sure my truth would. We met when I was 19 and he was 23. Back then, James was charming in a quiet, steady kind of way. The kind of man who didn't sweep you off your feet with flowers or poetry, but with consistency. A man who showed up when he said he would, remembered your favorite diner order and called just to ask if you made it home safe. That was enough. For me, I didn't need grand gestures. I just wanted something stable, reliable, safe. And James felt like all those things wrapped in one. He proposed after a year. No ring, just a soft question one night over dinner. We've been good together. Should we make it official? It wasn't romantic, not in the traditional sense, but it made sense to me. I'd never been the kind of girl who believed in fairy tales. Life had taught me too early that they didn't exist, so I said yes. We didn't have a wedding, not really. A courthouse, 2 witnesses, a rushed lunch afterward before James had to get back to work. I wore a cream blouse and black flats. He wore a suit he borrowed from his cousin. My mother wasn't thrilled, but she nodded and smiled. Marriage isn't about the wedding, she told me. It's about building a life. And so we started building it first. Things were simple. We shared a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a heater that worked half the time. I worked retail. James worked maintenance at a nearby hotel. We took turns cooking dinner, folding laundry, waking each other up before our shifts. It was exhausting, but we had each other. Or so I thought. James was always the quiet type. He didn't talk much about his feelings, but I assumed that was just how men were raised, stoic, reserved, private. I didn't push. I tried to make things easier for him. I handled the bills, reminded him about doctor's appointments, packed his lunch every day. I prided myself on being the woman who made his life run smoothly, because that's what a good wife was supposed to do, right? When I got pregnant with our first and only child, everything changed, at least for me. I still remember the moment I saw those 2 pink lines. I cried. Not out of fear, but out of pure joy. That maybe becoming a father would crack something open in him, show me more of the warmth I'd been quietly longing for, reading every book I could find, rearranging our tiny apartment to fit a crib, working double shifts until my ankles swelled. James kept going to work, coming home, watching TV, sleeping. He never touched my belly, never asked about baby names, never once came with me to a single doctor's appointment. Still, I told myself he was just tired. Overwhelmed. Men didn't know how to show love the way women did. When our son was born, I thought it would finally be different, that holding his child would awaken something in him. And it did, but not in the way I hoped. He became more distant, more withdrawn. The crying seemed to irritate him. He stopped coming home on time, said he was working late, though his paycheck stayed the same. I never questioned it. I was too tired from night feedings and too hopeful that this was just a phase. Years passed. We moved into a bigger home. I was the one who kept us afloat. I found ways to stretch $1. I was always doing something for James, for our son, for our home. I poured every ounce of energy I had into the people I loved, and I told myself it was enough, that one day they'd see it, they'd thank me, that James, especially, would look at me and realize I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. But that day never came. James was always distant, cold but not cruel. I used to wish he'd yell at me at least. That would mean he felt something. Instead, he treated me like background noise. The house was clean, dinner was hot, laundry folded. What else did I expect? Romance, affection, a simple thank you. I stopped asking. I learned to be grateful for small things. I stayed. I stayed when he forgot our anniversary for the 3rd year in a row. I stayed when I found lipstick on his shirt and he told me I was imagining things. I stayed when our son left for college and James barely said goodbye. I stayed when the loneliness grew so big inside me. I started talking to myself just to hear another voice. I stayed because I had built my entire life around this man, because I told myself that leaving after decades would be starting from scratch. And what kind of woman does that? What kind of woman gives up on a marriage she's held together for 40 years with nothing but grit and patience? The truth? That maybe he just didn't know how to show it, that maybe he really was trying in his own broken way. I convinced myself that his silence wasn't cruelty. was weariness. That he didn't stop holding my hand because he didn't love me, but because life had just worn him down, so I stayed. Even when I got sick, even when I collapsed in the kitchen and woke up in a sterile white hospital room, tubes in my arms and beeping machines keeping me alive, even when the doctor looked me in the eye and said, I still hoped James would walk in, sit by my bed, and finally look at me like I mattered. But instead, he sent flowers to another woman. The day I collapsed, it felt like my body had given up before my mind had a chance to catch up. I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup lentil, his favorite when the world tilted sideways. My knees buckled, the spoon clattered to the floor, and the last thing I saw was the edge of the kitchen counter, rushing up to meet my face. When I came to, I was in a hospital room surrounded by machines I didn't recognize, and the rhythmic beep 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 of something that was keeping me tethered to life. My chest ached, my hands were cold, and my first thought wasn't fear or confusion. It was, did James eat dinner? The nurse told me I was lucky. The fall hadn't cracked. My skull just left a deep bruise, but the scan they did afterward had revealed something far more serious. My heart, figuratively broken for years, was now failing in the most literal sense. Dilated cardiomyopathy, the doctor said, followed by a list of complications and medications. And lifestyle changes I wouldn't be around long enough to implement. He said it gently, with the kind of voice doctors use when they've had to deliver bad news too many times. But realistically, I want to prepare you and your family. It could be days, maybe weeks if we're lucky. Weeks. That's what I had left. I nodded. I didn't cry. I asked if I could have a glass of water, and when the nurse stepped out of the room, I closed my eyes and waited for the weight of those words to crush me. But nothing came. No panic, no denial. Just a strange kind of clarity. I was dying, and the first person I thought to call was my son. Jose was on a business trip. He said he'd take the next flight. His wife, Emily, was already on her way. I hadn't seen them in months, busy schedules, distance, excuses that made sense until they didn't. When they arrived, I felt a flicker of something warm. My son sat by my bed and held my hand, his eyes glassy but refusing to cry. For the first time in a long time, I felt surrounded by genuine care, and it didn't come from James. He visited once briefly. He walked in like a man stopping by a coworker's cubicle, not a husband standing at the bedside of his dying wife. I came as soon as I could, he said, glancing at his watch like he had somewhere else to be. He asked how I was feeling, but didn't wait for the answer. He looked around the room, complimented the hospital's lighting, then sat down for all of 5 minutes before saying, I'll be back tomorrow. I've got a few things to take care of first. Then he stood, kissed my forehead so quickly I barely felt it, and left. He didn't come the next day or the day after that. I didn't ask why. I didn't call. Some part of me already knew. The nurses tried to distract me. One of them brought crossword puzzles. Another brought a tiny potted plant to sit on the windowsill. The hospital chaplain offered to sit and pray with me. I politely declined. I didn't need prayers. I needed honesty. Answers. I needed someone to look me in the eye and tell me why. After all these years, I still didn't matter enough for my husband to show up. It wasn't until the 5th day that something unusual happened. A nurse wheeled in a massive bouquet of roses. They were stunning deep red with delicate petals and expensive wrapping. The kind of bouquet people save for proposals or apologies that can't be spoken out loud. For a moment, my heart fluttered. Maybe James had remembered. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally trying. But then the nurse pulled the card from the side. Oh, she said, brow furrowing. Sorry, this must be for another room. It's addressed to an Elena. Elena, I asked, already knowing the answer. In my bones. Yes, she said, scanning the card. From someone named James. That's your husband's name, right? My throat closed. She handed me the envelope. Maybe she thought I could help deliver it to the correct room. Maybe she hadn't realized what she was doing. I opened it with trembling fingers. You've always been my one and only. Yours forever, James. No mention of me. No mistake. He hadn't sent them to me at all. And the name, Elena, clawed at the edges of my memory until I finally placed it. 15 years ago, James had taken a new job in a firm downtown. They had an annual holiday party, and spouses were invited. I went once. Just once. And I remembered her. Elena. She was younger, pretty in that polished way. Laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. I had asked James about her afterward, joking at first, then a little more serious when I noticed how quickly he dismissed her name. Just a coworker, he'd said. You're being paranoid. Paranoid. But now here I was, dying in a hospital bed while he sent flowers and love notes to the woman he'd sworn was nothing. I handed the card back to the nurse, my hand steady in a way that scared even me. Please make sure it gets to the right room, I said. because it clearly wasn't meant for mine. That night, I didn't sleep. The machines continued their endless beeping beside me. Nurses tiptoed in and out to check vitals and change 4 bags, but none of it registered. My mind was elsewhere, replaying 1,000 moments over the past 4 decades with new, brutal clarity. Every time James came home late, claiming traffic or last-minute meetings, every time I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, every weekend conference, every cold glance, every dinner where he barely looked up from his plate. I used to tell myself it was work stress, that he was tired, that life just wore people down. But now I realized what it really was: distant. Not the kind time creates, but the kind people build deliberately when they've already left you in their heart. Elena, that name haunted me like a ghost that had always been there, just out of reach. I remembered the party clearly now. She wore a red dress and carried a silver clutch. The way she looked at James, not just politely, not like a coworker, but like someone who knew something I didn't. She touched his arm often, laughed too, long at things that weren't funny. At the time, I had tried to brush it off, told myself I was being insecure, but women know. Deep down, we always know. I thought about asking him, about confronting him with the card, the flowers, the memory of that night, but what would be the point? I wasn't looking for more lies. I already knew the truth. I could feel it in my bones, in the same bones that were growing weaker by the day. No, I didn't need James to say the words. He had already said them in silence, in absence, in every choice he made not to be here with me. The next morning, Jose returned to the hospital early. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept. He sat down beside me and offered a small smile. "Emily made breakfast," he said. "She's bringing you something later. That oatmeal here looks like cement." I laughed, just barely. "She always did make better oatmeal than me." He chuckled, but it didn't last. There was something he wasn't saying. I saw it in the way he kept fiddling with the hem of his sleeve. "Mom," he said quietly, "Dad's been acting strange. Has he come by?" I hesitated once, a few days ago. "That's it?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I nodded. Jose looked down, jaw tightening. "I asked him to come again yesterday. He said he was busy. Something about an old friend visiting from out of town. But when I called his office, they said he's been on leave all week." I didn't respond. What could I say? I couldn't protect Jose from this. Not anymore. He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "I'll stay a little longer today, okay?" I smiled, grateful. My son, my sweet, imperfect, loyal son, was trying his best to be strong. But even he didn't know the full story. Not yet. Later that afternoon, after Jose had stepped out to take a call, one of the nurses wheeled in the hospital's in-house notary. She handed me the documents. I'd requested copies of my will, the power of attorney paperwork, and a few blank sheets. I had asked the night nurse to help set it up. I had pretended it was routine, just a precaution. But now, with everything in front of me, I realized what I was about to do wasn't just paperwork. It was my final act. My last word. I picked up the pen with steady fingers and began to write. At first the words came slowly. I wasn't sure how to begin. How do you summarize 40 years of devotion and disappointment into a single letter? But once the ink touched the page, it poured out of me like a flood. I wrote about our early years, how much I had loved him, how I believed in us. I wrote about the sacrifices I made, the dreams I tucked away, the countless nights I stayed up with a sick child while he slept soundly in the next room. I wrote about the joy I felt seeing our son take his first steps, and the emptiness I felt the first time James forgot my birthday. Then I wrote about Elena. I didn't accuse, I didn't rage. I simply told the truth about the flowers, about the card, about the moment I realized I had shared my entire life with a man who never truly chose me. I told him I wasn't angry anymore because anger was for people who still had hope. I didn't. What I had now was clarity and a choice. The last part of the letter was the hardest. I told him he wouldn't be receiving anything from me when I was gone. Not the house, not the savings, not a kind mention in my obituary. Everything was going to Jose, to Emily, to the people who showed up when it mattered, to the people who still remembered how to love without conditions. I folded the letter carefully and sealed it in an envelope. Then I wrote a second one. This one addressed to Elena. It wasn't venomous. I didn't insult her or call her names. I just told her what she had helped me understand, that I had spent my entire life waiting for a man who was never truly mine, that it took watching him send her flowers while I lay dying for me to finally see the truth. I thanked her, genuinely, because if not for that moment, I might have died still believing the lie. But now I would go knowing I had found my voice, even if it was with my last breath. I handed both letters to the notary and gave clear instructions. Deliver them only after I pass, not before, and make sure they go directly to their hands. No middlemen. No mistakes. That night, I stared out the hospital window at the dark sky, watching the wind dance through the trees, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt at peace. I couldn't choose how I would leave this world, but I could choose what I left behind. And this time, it would be the truth. Unfiltered, unapologetic. Mine. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, stirred not by pain, but by a strange calmness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peace exactly, more like stillness, the quiet kind that settles after a storm has passed. I lay there, watching the sunlight crawl across the hospital wall, golden and soft. It felt like the world had slowed down just enough for me to think clearly, like the noise had been turned down to a whisper. James still hadn't called, not a single text, not even one of those empty check-ins that read more like obligation than care. I wondered if he thought I'd already passed. I wondered if he was relieved. A nurse brought in my breakfast and a few test results. She smiled politely, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. People didn't know how to act around someone who might not have much time left. They either overcompensated with forced cheer or tiptoed, like grief was contagious. I didn't blame her. I'd been that person once too, unsure of where to look or what to say. She left, and I picked at the oatmeal without much appetite. Then, as I reached for the glass of water beside my tray, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. There was no text, just an image, blurry, but clear enough. A photo of James sitting in a dimly lit restaurant, leaning across the table toward a woman with auburn hair and pearl earrings. Elena, they weren't touching. Not exactly. But the way he looked at her, that soft, unguarded expression, I hadn't seen on his face in decades. It said more than any hand-holding ever could. I stared at it for a long time, not blinking, not breathing, as if doing either would shatter the last sliver of illusion I had left, and still, I didn't cry. Because this time I wasn't surprised. The truth was, I had known about Elena long. Before the flowers, long before the card, long before the photo. I just never wanted to admit it to myself. It started with small things, years ago. A hotel receipt in his jacket pocket from a city he claimed he'd never been to. A call from a number labeled E that he declined the moment I walked into. The room emails quickly closed when I entered his office. I noticed all of it, every sign, every red flag. But I swallowed them like pills, one by one, telling myself it was better not to know. Better to keep the family whole. Better to pretend, because confronting the truth would have meant facing the possibility that my entire marriage had been a performance, that I had spent my life cooking meals, folding shirts, smoothing sheets, and waiting up late into the night for a man who was never truly mine. And I was tired of being the woman who turned her head the other way, tired of apologizing for things I hadn't done, tired of playing the quiet, dutiful wife while he lived a double life right under my nose. One night nearly 10 years ago, I'd opened our joint bank statement and noticed something: age repeated transfers to an account I didn't recognize. They weren't massive sums, just a few $100s here and there, spaced out to avoid drawing attention. But they added up. When I asked him about it, he shrugged, said it was business expenses, something about a contractor, something about a loan. I didn't press further. Back then, Jose was in high school, struggling with his grades and self-esteem. James barely talked to him, and I was the only one holding the pieces together. I couldn't afford to pick a fight, so I let it go, like I always did. But now, I remembered everything. The lies, the detachment, the way he always kept one foot out the door. Like he was waiting for a better offer, a second chance at some long-lost love he never fully got over. And I wasn't angry. At Elena? Not really. I didn't know what James had told her. Maybe she believed he was separated. Maybe he fed her stories about our loveless marriage or how I didn't understand him. He was good at that, spinning things just enough to sound innocent, playing the victim in his own mess. But none of that mattered now, because this wasn't about her. And it wasn't even about him. It was about me. About what I had allowed. About the years I gave away freely to someone who never once tried to deserve them. I pulled the blankets up to my chest and stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly, deeply, as if I could inhale the years I had lost and exhale the bitterness they left behind. I didn't hate James, but I pitied him, because a man who spends his life chasing ghosts, whether it's a woman from his past, a fantasy of what could have been, or the thrill of being wanted, never really lives. He drifts from one lie to the next, from one dinner reservation to the next bouquet delivered to someone he never truly earned. And I had finally stopped drifting. That letter I wrote, it wasn't just a message, it was a mirror, one he couldn't shatter or ignore. A final reminder that I had seen him, really seen him, and I wasn't impressed. He had always thought I would die quietly. But instead, I was preparing to leave a storm behind, one that would settle in his conscience, twist around his memories, and haunt every what if he thought he still had left. Let Elena have him. Let her live with the silences, the disappearing acts, the convenient forgetfulness, because she wasn't getting a fairy tale. She was inheriting a lie, and I was finally, blessedly, done. 2 days later, James walked into my hospital room for the second time since I'd been admitted. No flowers this time. No false concern. Just him, standing stiff in the doorway like he'd been forced there. He was wearing a pressed button tucked too neatly into his slacks, like he was trying to present himself as the man he used to be, composed, dependable, in control. But I knew better. And judging by the heavy bags under his eyes and the dull gray creeping into his hair, he knew it too. He gave a short nod. "You look better than I expected." I didn't smile. "And you look exactly how I imagined." He shifted uncomfortably, stepping farther inside. "I heard Jose's been staying with you," said. "The doctors are optimistic now. They're hopeful," I replied. "But hope is like air in a balloon. One wrong move and it pops." He sat in the chair beside me, but not too close. The air between us felt thick, not from tension, but from years of unsaid things that had finally settled. Like dust, he glanced at the machines beside my bed, the 4-drip, the heart monitor. "You're angry," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "No," I said flatly. "Anger implies expectation. I stopped expecting anything from you. A long time ago." James rubbed his temples and exhaled, frustrated. "You found the card?" It wasn't a confession. It was a reluctant acknowledgement. "I did," I said calmly, "and I also saw the photo." He looked startled for half a second. "So he didn't know that part yet." "Good. She means nothing," he said quickly. "Too quickly, Elena. She reached out after she heard I was struggling. She's just a friend." "Then why send her flowers while your wife lay in a hospital bed hooked up to tubes?" I asked, my voice steady, eyes fixed on his. Why did that friend deserve affection? While I got silence, his mouth opened, then closed. "No defense. Not even a fake one. I didn't think you'd see it," he finally said. "It was just a moment of weakness." I leaned forward slightly, my voice low and sharp. "You've been weak for 20 years, James. You didn't just trip and fall into a mistake. You built a second life, brick by brick, right beside mine, while I stayed busy cleaning up your messes." He stood up suddenly, pacing. "I didn't want this to turn into a fight. I just came here to talk. I figured, maybe we could clear the air, maybe. I don't know, start over." I laughed, not bitterly, not even mockingly, just softly, with genuine disbelief. "Start over, James. I'm possibly dying. What is there to start over from?" He stopped pacing, turning to me with a pained expression that almost passed for regret. "I didn't know you were writing letters." Ah, there it was. The real reason he came. I smiled, cool and composed. "And yet you found out anyway." "Elena told me," he said, not meeting my eyes. She said you left her something. That she's worried about what's in it, is she?" I said, my tone dry. "Funny, I didn't realize the mistress had any rights to my final thoughts." "Don't call her that," he snapped. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's accurate." He didn't answer. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Rebecca, I know I hurt you. I know I wasn't the husband you deserved. But you have to understand, life, it wears you down. I didn't plan any of this. I just got bored." I finished for him. "Got tired of the woman who stood by you for 40 years while you climbed ladders and played hero. You wanted more, something new, something that made you feel young again. I understand perfectly." He looked down, shame flickering across his face, but I had no sympathy left. I had given it all away years ago. "I wrote the letters for closure," I continued, "not revenge. I didn't expose you publicly. I didn't shame you to your colleagues. I just told the truth. One letter, one woman. That's all." He nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence he knew he earned. "Not because he's perfect, but because he still shows up, even now." James swallowed hard. "I never stopped loving you." That caught me off guard, not because I believed it, but because I could see that he believed it. Or at least, he believed he had loved me in the only way he was capable of loving anyone, selectively, conditionally, and always with a backdoor open in case someone more convenient came along. "I think you loved the idea of me," I replied. "The version of me that kept the house clean and the dinners hot, the woman who didn't question where you were or who you were with, but loved the kind that stays even when things are ugly." Sat down again, more heavily this time, like the truth had physically drained him. I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost. Is there anything I can do?" he asked quietly. "Anything to make it right?" I shook my head. Your choices. Now you live with them. Silence settled again. Not awkward, but final. He stood up slowly, straightened his shirt, and nodded. Then I guess this is goodbye? Yes, I said. It is. He walked out without looking back, and I didn't ask him to. As the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a strange release. Not triumph, not bitterness, just freedom. The last loose thread had finally been cut, the final scene played, and I was still here, still breathing, still me, only lighter. The letter had done its job, and now I could begin the next chapter. Whatever it might be that night, the hospital was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that made even the smallest sound feel magnified. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, each one as blank and uniform as the last. For once, my thoughts weren't tangled with regret or bitterness. I wasn't haunted by James's voice or Elena's smug face or even the ache of lost time. What filled the space now was something else, possibility. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a photo or a half-hearted message. It was a video call request from Jose. I hesitated before answering. Our relationship had always been complicated. He grew up watching his father walk in and out, like the world owed him nothing, and somewhere along the way he'd learned that love meant endurance, not joy. I had tried to teach him differently, but the damage had already seeped into his bones. He was my son, brilliant, loyal, stubborn, but he was also his father's son in ways that frightened me still. Hey Mom, Jose, I said. It's late. I know, he murmured, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I saw Dad today, he said. He looked like a man who lost something, but he couldn't explain what. I didn't respond. I think he realized it too late. Jose continued. That everything he wanted he already had, and he ruined it. There it was, the quiet truth no one wanted to say out loud, but it didn't fix anything. I'm not here to defend him, Jose added quickly. I'm not even sure I fully forgive him, but I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. Unspoken. You didn't deserve any of this, Mom. You didn't deserve to be ignored or betrayed, or pushed aside like you were just furniture in someone else's life. I blinked slowly. The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside me. You gave everything, he went on, to me, to him, and I saw it. Even when I pretended not to. I saw you staying up late sewing my Halloween costume because we couldn't afford to buy one. I saw you reheating the same bowl of soup 3 nights in a row so Dad wouldn't feel guilty about not coming home. I saw all of it. My throat tightened and I never said thank you, Jose whispered. You don't have to. No, I do, he interrupted, because I made excuses for him. I copied him. I let you carry things alone because I thought maybe that's just what mothers do. But that was wrong, and I see that now. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit my hands. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I nodded, unable to speak, because for all the wounds James had left behind, it was Jose's words that finally started to stitch me back together, not because he fixed anything, but because he saw me. Truly saw me rest. Mom, he said softly. We'll talk more tomorrow. You always did. The call ended, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. In the morning, I sat upright in bed with a strange determination. The doctors came in, offering cautious optimism. There were fragile ones that things might turn around. No promises, but hope, for real this time, and suddenly I felt like I had something to fight for. Not to win James back, not to prove anything to anyone, but to reclaim myself, piece by piece. The nurses noticed the shift. One of them, a younger girl named Tasha, smiled as she changed my IV. You look different today, she said. I feel different, I replied. Good, different. The best kind. Later that afternoon, I asked for paper. Not a tablet, not a phone. Actual paper. I wanted to write not letters for anyone else, but for me, my own truths, my own history. Not how James remembered it or how Jose saw it, but how I lived it. The good, the bad, the things I stayed silent about for decades, the meals cooked with resentment in my chest, the nights I cried in the shower so no one could hear, the birthdays I spent alone while James was working late, but also the joys, Jose's first steps, the surprise bouquet I bought for myself one summer just to feel human again. The night I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching fireflies, and for 5 quiet minutes, felt like everything might be okay. I filled 5 pages in a single sitting, and I wasn't done because that's what happens when you stop shrinking. When you stop apologizing for taking up space, you begin to breathe again. You begin to speak that the next day. The door to my hospital room opened again, but it wasn't James, and it wasn't Jose. It was Elena wearing a beige trench coat. She looked nervous. I raised my eyebrows. Rebecca, she began, her voice tight. I didn't come to argue. Then why are you here? She hesitated, then stepped closer. I heard about your condition, and I realized I never apologized for my part. For my selfishness, I said nothing. Let her squirm. I told myself he was unhappy, that you two had grown apart. I believed what I needed to believe, but I knew, she confessed. Deep down, I knew, and I still went along with it. She opened her purse and pulled out a crumpled card. The flowers. The ones he sent me. I never kept them, but I kept the card. I don't know why. She placed it on my nightstand. I thought you deserved to read it, to know what he really wrote. She turned to leave Elena. I called out. She paused. Apology accepted, but don't mistake that for forgiveness. She nodded slowly. I understand. And know that I always wondered what life with you could have been. Maybe in another world, maybe in another time. There was no mention of me. No guilt, no reflection. Just longing for a fantasy he never deserved. And that's when I knew I had made the right choice. Because in this world, in this time, I still had life left in me, and I wasn't wasting it on someone who only saw me when I was already halfway out the door. The following weeks became a blur of recovery, slow, painful, but strangely empowering. Each day I woke up was another day James had to live with the silence I left behind. And another day I reclaimed something he had tried to strip from me. My voice, my agency, my future. The hospital walls, once suffocating, started to feel less like a cage and more like a tunnel. And at the other end, I could finally see light. The doctors were amazed at my progress. You're responding better than we expected. One of them told me, keep this up, and we might be discussing discharge options sooner than we thought. My marriage had become a quiet kind of imprisonment that didn't require locks or bars, just a daily sacrifice of self. But that sacrifice was over. One afternoon, I asked the nurse to help me out of bed and into the chair by the window. The sunlight felt sharp and real, like something I hadn't felt in years. Hand in hand, that used to be my dream. Old with someone who adored me. But James never held my hand like that. Not in public. As if love was a job he didn't apply for but couldn't quit. I didn't want endurance anymore. I wanted intention, presence, joy around. That time Jose started visiting more, quietly at first, bringing coffee. Then one day he brought a worn photo album I hadn't seen in years. I thought you might like to look through it, he said, setting it on my lap. Inside were pictures of a different life. One that existed before I forgot how to smile without trying. Photos of Jose with missing teeth and scraped knees, of me in a thrifted dress that somehow made me feel beautiful, of birthdays where the cake was burnt but the laughter was real. There were a few of James, too, always looking just slightly distracted. Even in the pictures where he smiled, his eyes looked like they were somewhere else. It didn't make me sad anymore, just tired. At a photo of myself holding baby Jose, the woman I used to be, she's still here, Jose said. She just needed space to breathe. He was right. Discharged. No balloons. No flowers. Just a ride home and a quiet sense of relief that I had made it out alive, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I had walked through fire and didn't come out the same. I returned to a home that no longer felt like mine. It was a rental I'd picked out during the early days of my illness, thinking it would be temporary. But now, standing in its small kitchen with cracked tile and humming pipes, blanket on the couch, chosen by me. For me, there was no ghost of betrayal here. No reminders of whispered phone calls or lipstick-stained callers. Just me. And it was enough. One morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky in shades of apricot and dusty lavender. I walked slowly, still weak, but stronger than I had been in years. At the corner cafe, the owner, a man named Amir, who always played soft jazz and remembered everyone's name, saw me and waved. You're back, he said, grinning. Missed seeing you around. I smiled back. I pulled a small notebook from my bag and began to write. Not letters this time. Not goodbyes. Just thoughts, feelings, dreams, things I had buried so deep. I wrote about the hobbies I wanted to, try painting, dancing, learning, a new language. I wrote about how I wanted to feel free, unafraid, unapologetically myself. And then I wrote one last thing. I forgive myself for staying too long in a place I had outgrown. Because for so long I blamed myself for the cracks in my marriage, for not leaving sooner, for not seeing Elena coming. But none of that was fair. I did the best I could with the love I had. And sometimes love isn't enough. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was from James. Inside was a letter, just a single page. Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means I finally got the courage to say what I should have said years ago. You didn't deserve what I did. You gave me everything, and I gave you scraps. I kept waiting for the feeling to change, for the regret to fade, but it never did. I carry it every day. You were never second best. I was just too blind to see you were the best thing that ever happened. To me, if this is goodbye, then I hope it's on your terms. I hope you find joy again. I hope you feel adored. And I hope in whatever life comes next, I get it right. James, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer, not out of nostalgia. But that realization doesn't mean you owe them a place in your healing. Some things are just meant to end, and that's okay. Months passed, more distant. It was strange how quickly life moved on once you decided not to wait for someone to apologize. Passport in hand, surrounded by the low hum of travelers headed toward new beginnings. Not because I had always dreamed of it, but because it felt right, romantic, chaotic, beautifully alive in a way I had forgotten how to be. The streets of Florence welcomed me like an old friend. I ate gelato in the rain, wandered through art galleries until my feet ached, and watched sunsets over the Arno with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude that I had lived long enough to start over. Gratitude that I had survived a love that wasn't really love. He was a retired sculptor with a crooked smile and the kind of laugh that made people nearby turn their heads. He wasn't trying to impress me. He didn't ask invasive questions or offer shallow compliments. He just talked, listened, shared stories of his life, his failures, the wife he had lost 5 years earlier, and how grief had made him quiet for too long. We talked for hours, then we met again, then again, until without realizing it, I began to look forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to anything else. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning, or quieter or less emotional. He didn't flinch when I told him about James. He didn't pity me when I mentioned Elena. He just nodded, then told me how he once stayed in a bad marriage out of fear, not out of love. That's how I knew I could trust him, not because he was perfect, but because he was broken, too, and still chose to be kind. After Italy, I traveled to Portugal, then to Greece, and finally to Kyoto. Each place added a piece back to me. I filled journals with thoughts and sketches, took hundreds of photos, and learned how to say thank you in 5 new languages. I met women like me, survivors of long marriages, of betrayals, of illnesses. Some had walked away earlier than I did, others later, but all of them were proof that a second life was possible, even after the first one let you down. And the letters, those kept coming to Dot. After James's apology, I started writing again. Not to him, to myself. Letters I would never send but needed to write. Sometimes angry, sometimes full of hope, sometimes raw and desperate and confusing, but always honest. I wrote about what it felt like to be forgotten in your own home. What it felt like to hear someone whisper "I love you" into the wrong woman's ear. What it felt like to stand in a room full of people who claimed to care about you, and realize not a single one had your back. But I also wrote about what it felt like to take your first solo train ride through a foreign city, to drink coffee on a balcony and feel the sun warm your skin without anyone asking where you'd been, to dance barefoot in your living room because no one was watching and no one would laugh. Some nights I sat by myself and watched old home videos, not out of nostalgia, but because I needed to remember how much I had endured, to remind myself that even in those quiet moments, birthday parties, school plays, burnt Thanksgiving dinners, I had always been the one holding it together. Not James, not Jose, me, and now I was holding myself together in a new way. The last message I ever received from Jose came around Christmas. It was a photo of Jacob holding a handmade card that read, "Merry Christmas, Grandma. I miss you." The message beneath it was brief. "He keeps asking about you. Maybe one day we can talk." I stared at it for a long time. My finger hovered over the reply button, but in the end I just closed the message and sat there in silence. I wasn't ready to talk. Maybe I never would be. Some bridges don't need to be burned, but they don't need to be rebuilt either. The final letter I wrote came not long after my 71st birthday. I had just returned from a trip to Croatia with 3 women I now considered sisters. That night, I sat by the fireplace in my small but cozy apartment, and I wrote to the one person I had ignored the most over the years, myself. Dear me, you've been through hell, and still, you gave love, raised a child, kept faith in people who didn't deserve it. You held back anger to keep the peace. You gave more than you had. But here's what matters: you made it. You made it out. You chose yourself. You grew. You forgave. You left the door open for peace, but closed the one that kept dragging you down. You did something most people are too scared to do. You walked away from comfort to find something real, and you found it. In yourself, I'm proud of you. I love you. Me. There were no tears when I folded the letter and placed it in the small box on my dresser, labeled Truth. only peace because the story of James and Elena and the flowers on my deathbed would always be part of my history, but it would never define me again. I had rewritten the ending, and this time, I was the hero. They say the heart has its reasons the mind can never fully understand. For years, I tried to reason through the choices James made. The silence Jose chose. The betrayal that arrived in the form of a bouquet on what was supposed to be my final day. But now, standing here in the soft glow of a late afternoon, with a breeze that carries no memory but only promise, I finally understand that some stories aren't meant to be solved there, meant to be survived. I didn't get the fairy tale ending. There was no grand apology that healed every wound. No perfect reconciliation where the past vanished beneath some perfect new beginning. What I got instead was more important. I got clarity. I got truth. I got to see people for who they really were, and I got to walk away. James's love was a house built on sand. It looked like shelter until the first real storm. Jose's loyalty was a conditional offering, handed out only when it was convenient, and snatched away the moment it wasn't. I spent 50 years trying to earn what I should have been given. Freely, care, respect, honesty, and in the end, when everything crumbled, when the house, the marriage, and the illusion collapsed, what remained was me, still standing, still breathing, still dreaming. I look back now, not with rage, but with something gentler. Not forgiveness, exactly, but distance. Space between the woman I was and the woman I've become. I don't hate James. I don't mourn what we had, because what we had wasn't love, it was survival. And I'm done surviving. I live now fully, shamelessly unapologetic ally, the kind of living that doesn't ask for permission, the kind of living that begins again, no matter how late in life it starts. I dance when I want to. I travel where my heart pulls me. I write what I feel, and sometimes, in quiet moments, I sit alone and feel something I once thought I'd lost forever. Joy. Not the kind wrapped in someone else's arms or promised in someone else's words, but the kind that lives deep in the soul, the kind that's earned, not given to anyone who's watching, anyone who's still waiting for someone to come around, to treat them right, to apologize, to choose them. I hope you understand this. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself, because no one is coming to rescue you but you. You can save yourself, just like I did.